Well, welcome everybody. Good evening. Thanks so much for coming. We had the idea for this webinar as we've been speaking to families for the last couple of weeks who feel summer right around the corner, if not in case it hasn't already started, and wanted to add kind of last minute suggestions and strategies. Summer is this kind of special opportunity where, I feel sometimes that high school students are the busiest people in the world. They're running between high school and activities and homework and then SAT and all these activities. And so for me, summers are precious. And on the one hand, it's precious for the kids to be free and be kids and have fun, but it's also very important to take advantage of that time for a very ever so complex application process. And so ideally, you get to do both. You get to take advantage of summer for, to work, to have fun with friends, travel. But we're also suggesting that we take advantage of the summer to add value in your college application. And so that's what tonight's webinar is going to be focused on. And we're super excited to be joined by Susan Powers, rock star in the world of test prep. And we've enjoyed meeting with Susan over the last few months and really is a reference of excellence in the world of college admissions and test prep. So yeah, we're going to jump in. If we want to again, we'll just kind of introduce ourselves and we're going to tag team this webinar to add value in terms of how we can help students and families through the college admissions process. So my name is Marcus DeWitt. I'm the founder of Blue Ivy Coaching. We're a college counseling company. I'm based in Mexico, in Miami, and we have an office in Mexico City. And then Rodrigo is based in Houston. And I'd also love to introduce Susan, who's the founder of Woodlands Test Prep. Susan, if you want to share a little bit about yourself and your company as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here and talking to all of you guys. We are the, we think the, premier test prep company in the Woodlands. We work with students on the SAT and the ACT. We've been around for about 15 years. We work with students in their homes, and we also work with them in small group classes at our office. So we are excited to tell you all the new and exciting things that are happening in the college admissions testing world today.
Thanks, Susan. And then Rodrigo, do you want to just introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi guys. My name is Rodrigo Lerdo. I'm the regional manager of Blue Ivy Coaching here in Houston. I'm based in the Woodlands. Thank you guys for connecting today.
So Blue Ivy Coaching, our objective here is to help students maximize their full potential. So we are a college counseling company, and it's not just focused on helping students get into the Ivy Leagues. We also help students with their applications for UT, Texas A&M, and it's a holistic perspective about helping students maximize their unique academic and pre-professional potential. So we like to begin this process taking a step back and thinking about the 4-year roadmap to college, right? And so thinking about tonight's webinar's topic of how to take advantage of the summer, obviously it depends on where you are in this journey. So if you're an 8th grader, rising 9th grader, what you need to do in this summer is very different. If you're a junior, rising senior, right before your college applications. So I first want to start with a few frameworks of how should we understand this complex and competitive college admissions process to give you some guidelines so that you can understand, again, frameworks, but then apply them to your individual situation. So what we like to do is 8th going into 9th grade, your objective as you're going into high school is obviously to start well. It's to explore your different interests. It's to discover maybe new passions. I like to tell families that if over summers in middle school, you've been going to outdoor summer camp, maybe this is the summer where you no longer go to sleepaway camp and you start working or doing a pre-college program. So that shift from middle school to high school is really starting to discover and explore what your academic and professional interests are. As you move into 10th grade, we should be laying down that foundation and getting our focus, which having more clarity on what your profile is and really choosing those couple of extracurricular activities where you should develop more participation and focus on impact. As we go into junior year, that's really about taking those more challenging coursework in APs, maybe taking, advancing in math over the summer, obviously preparing for the SAT as well. And really just that summer before senior year, it's just about finishing strong, achieving and doing some amazing extracurriculars, but it's really, once we get into August, September of senior year, we're applying to college. So even though high school feels like, high school is a 4-year program, what we send to colleges is really just those first 3 years. Okay. So again, this is how we like to think about the roadmap to college, and we'll guide students through each part of this journey. And so as part of this roadmap, we like to think about 3 key questions: what to study, where to apply, and what you have to do to get it. Okay, so we're going to now tackle that first question of what to study. Okay, so our first perspective here in terms of what to study is thinking about how the degrees of the future are not the same degrees that one has historically studied to have professional success or stability in the past. In other words, we're entering into that 4th industrial revolution. And I've been doing this webinar for a couple of years now. And when I used to say that, guys, in the year 2050, 65% of the jobs that will exist in the future don't exist today, that is a data point from the World Economic Forum, McKinsey, and other research institutes. People used to look at me like a crazy person, as if I was a conspiracy theorist. Now with AI, ChatGPT, it's quite obvious that this changes in the labor market are accelerating. Even talking about the year 2050 sounds far away. We're starting to see these changes in especially entry-level jobs, white-collar jobs, almost immediately. So in our first step of what we do with students is we guide them towards not the degrees that have been traditionally stable or successful, but what are those majors or degrees that students should study so that they're aligned kind of the tailwinds of history as kind of we move into this new labor market. So that's our first framework I want to leave you. The second is we like to use the Japanese philosophy of ikigai, which means your reason for being. And the reason why I like this philosophy, it's not just about study your passion. All the time I hear parents tell their kids, find your passion, study your passion, do what you love. That's WeWork slogan, do what you love. That's fine. And that's good. And that's important. We shouldn't just choose high-paying jobs because they're economically stable. We want to find the intersection between your skills, your interests, but also what the world needs. And I like to think about this phrase, what the world needs, almost as a poetic way of talking about the labor market. So when we find a academic and career path at the intersection of these 4 questions, we get a deeper sense of being and purpose. And that's what we aim to help students kind of align by doing the research and asking these questions. Okay, so these are some kind of key questions as we're thinking about how to tackle that roadmap, what to do over summer, how to kind of structure your high school career. It begins first from this question of what to study, and then the second question of where to apply. So we'll do a university exploration considering fit, big school, small school, private school, public school. Do you want the classic American college experience of frats and sports, something more urban like an NYU? You have to build a balanced list of your high reaches, low reaches, matches, and likelies. And then also we like to consider of how do you take advantage of the summer, whether to visit some of these schools and do some campus tours. Even if there's not summer semesters, you can still visit classes. You can reach out to professors in your major and have some coffee chats. So summer's a great chance to organize that Boston to DC campus visit, go from LA to San Francisco, or obviously visit schools locally in Texas as well. The third part and where we're going to spend most of our time tonight is focusing on the third question, what you have to do to get in. So I told you guys there's 3 questions. 1, what to study. And we talked about the degrees of the future and the Ikigai framework. 2, where to apply, and know how we have to do an in-depth university exploration. And the third part is what happens inside of the admissions committee. So now we're going to go through and talk about what is the most important part in these very competitive admissions processes. So this is the list of application requirements, but this isn't just the list of what you have to submit. This is in order of importance. So the NACAC, the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, sends a survey to admissions officers, and over 2,000 admissions officers respond every year. And this is in order of priority of importance in a college application. So yes, the first and most important part of a college application is your unweighted GPA. Why do I say unweighted? Sometimes I hear students or parents mask a little bit the GPA. They're like, what's your GPA? 4.675, and it sounds super fancy. Okay, what's your unweighted GPA? 3.3. All right, so at the end of the day, we do care about how you're doing in the classes, but also we care about how challenging the coursework is. After GPA, what's the second most important, and I would even argue maybe now becoming the first most important part of an application, is your standardized test score, right? So, I always like to say, even Malala, who literally won the Nobel Peace Prize, you can look this up. She didn't get into Harvard because she didn't have the SAT score. She was so busy saving the world, she didn't study for the SAT. Now, she got into Oxford in the UK, but she did not get into Ivy League schools in the US because she didn't have the SAT score. So the SAT is a huge priority. After you get the GPA and SAT, the other parts of your application, that's where you can stand out and shine. So that's where you focus on your essays. That's where you develop a kick-ass extracurricular profile. That's where your teachers brag about you in the letters and you do your interview. Okay, so these are our priorities. And so now I'm going to kick it over to Susan because the SAT, it's always been so important, but especially in this world post-pandemic, it's become even more important. Susan's going to kind of walk us through how to think about SAT, ACT in 2025. And then I'll wrap us up at the end talking about some extracurricular strategies to do over the summer.
All right, thank you very much. So let's talk first about this idea that as Marcus mentioned, the pandemic changed the face of college admissions by introducing this idea of test optional. Of course, during the pandemic, nobody could go take a test, so most colleges went test optional, which meant you didn't have to send a score. Now that we've gone back to regular life, many schools, many of the Ivy League schools have gone back to requiring scores. Let's talk a little bit about why that is. So if you look at what grades students are graduating with, it's kind of crazy. So back when they started doing this study, this is a study that has been done every year since 1966, I think, with percent of entering college freshmen that have an A average. Back in the day, it was 22%, basically. Then if you go to 1990, and I chose that day or that year because that's the first year that we have consistent data from ACT scores, it was about 38%. I graduated from high school in 1985. The valedictorian of my very large high school did not have a 4.0. It just wasn't a thing. If you look going across here, you'll see that ACT scores have been pretty even. And even in fact, here you can see with the pandemic, they've even gone down for the first time kind of ever. Whereas grade inflation has continued to march right ahead. This last year, these statistics are kind of hot off the press. 84% of students who go to university graduate with an A average. So grades do not differentiate you essentially at all if you're looking at selective schools. Everybody has a straight A average. So you need to be thinking about what's the other number that is going to be meaningful, and that's going to be your SAT or ACT score. And this is just a quick list of schools over the last couple of years that have returned to requiring scores. And as you can see, it's pretty extensive. And this doesn't even count schools that might not require scores for admission, but will give merit aid based on scores. So there's lots of other, or they use scores for placement in classes. So there's a lot of reasons that schools are going to want scores, even if it's not required for admission. So let's talk a little bit then about, okay, great, I'm in. I need to do the SAT or the ACT. What do I need to know? So the first thing we're going to talk about is whether you need to take both or not. What are the differences? And then kind of how do I plan to do this? So let's start with which test. And the answer is, and this is going to be kind of weird for those of you in the Woodlands area who live in Texas, actually every university in the United States except both the SAT and the ACT. Here in Texas, all we really talk about is the SAT. And so we kind of forget that there's this other test out there, but there are in fact two different choices. And we're going to talk about their differences, but what you're going to discover is that some of those differences work better for different people's brains. And so since colleges accept both scores, they don't care which one you send, what they're going to do with that is they're going to use this concordance table. This is a small piece of it. You can Google this right now if you want to compare. Let's say you have a 24 ACT, but you have a 1300 SAT. Well, you definitely want to send that SAT score, and you're probably going to keep the ACT score in your pocket because your SAT score is a lot higher. So we want to decide, which one am I better at? How do I do that? How do I think about that? So let's talk about some of the differences between the two tests. So the SAT, as probably many of you know on this phone call, about 2 years ago went completely digital. There's no more paper SAT. The ACT is in the middle of, let's just charitably call it its midlife crisis, and is still offering their test on paper, but they have started offering digital testing on their national test days. They've been doing digital testing for school and district testing for several years and international testing for several years, but here in Texas, we don't really do a lot of that, so we don't really see that. But now you can take the SAT digitally as well. The SAT is section adaptive, and without going into that a lot, that just means that some students will see different questions from each other in an effort to allow them to answer fewer questions and still get to the same result, whereas the ACT continues to have a test where everyone sees the same questions. And the SAT gives you a lot more time per question, so it feels less rushed, whereas the ACT gives you less time per question. Most people feel a little time stressed on the ACT. Some additional differences, though, kind of what the SAT gives in time, they kind of take away with difficulty. It is a more complex task. It has more difficult vocabulary. It has more complex sentence structures. It's trickier in the sense that there's more logic required to figure out what it is they want you to do. ACT, super straightforward, much simpler vocabulary. On the SAT, there's no long passages. There's just a single paragraph for every verbal question. ACT still has long passages with a number of questions for each passage. The SAT has very limited math topics. It's almost all algebra. It's about 70% algebra, and it's a very small number of algebra topics, whereas the ACT is like a smorgasbord of everything you've learned in math since middle school through Algebra 2. And then finally, the SAT does not have a science section. The ACT does. It's not really about science specifically. It's a little about science, but not that much. It's mostly about reading comprehension of charts and tables. And it's now optional, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that right now. So I did mention the midlife crisis thing with the ACT. So here we are. So the ACT was always on paper, just paper for national test dates. Now you can take it digitally. I'll go ahead and just say out loud here, don't do that. Don't take it digitally. I've got a giant blog post on my website that tells you all the reasons why, but it's a terrible idea. Don't take the ACT on the computer. It still is the same test for everyone. So for example, we'll talk about the timeline in just a second, but in September, when the test will have this new format for everyone, if you take it on the computer or if you take it on paper, you're going to see the same questions. So everyone's going to see the same questions. The science section used to not be optional, and now it is optional. For many students, that's going to be something that's appealing. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Marcus and his crowd are going to want you to take the science section. Most colleges are going to want to see it, and you may not know ahead of time whether they will or not, so you should take it. But I'll let Marcus correct me if he feels differently. And then finally, the ACT is now about 5 minutes shorter than the SAT if you don't take science. And it does now give you more time per question than it used to, but it's still fairly fast. All right, when is this happening? When is this midlife crisis happening? Well, it is happening right now. So April 2025 was the first time that this enhanced format happened. The old form paper is still available through July. So that's the last time we're going to see that. So if you're a junior, or if you know a junior, they should be finishing that up by July. Then in September of this year, everything will go to the new format, both on paper and digitally. And then finally, again, this doesn't matter super much in our area because we don't do a lot of in-school ACT testing, but there are a couple of schools in the Woodlands area that do ACT school day testing. That testing won't change to the new format till spring of 2026 for reasons that only make sense to ACT. All right, so now that I've just told you a bunch of things, how do I decide? First thing, take a practice PSAT or SAT. If you are a sophomore or a junior this next year, you're probably going to take the SAT or the PSAT whether you want to or not. You're going to show up at school one day, and that's what you're doing that day. You can also take a practice test in the Blue Book app that College Board puts out. You can also then take a practice ACT. Now, again, because we're in Texas, it's a little bit less accessible. If your school, we do practice tests at many local schools, so that's a great opportunity to take a proctored test. We also do a lot of practice tests at the local libraries. So if you want to take a ACT, that's a great way to do it. You can also just hit us up and we'll send you one. You can take it at home. But regardless, take an ACT cold to see how it goes, because then what we want to do is we want to compare those scores based on that concordance table we saw earlier. But not just the concordance, we also want to compare your confidence. Which one makes you feel more comfortable? The theory is, whichever one you're starting higher on is where you're going to end up higher, but there can be some differences depending on your confidence or the individual section scores. Okay, when should I do all of this? Well, I'm glad you asked. You should definitely, first of all, plan on testing 2 to 4 times. I can't tell you how many phone conversations I have with people where they're like, oh, I just want to be one and done. And I'm like, I also want someone to, make it so I never have to exercise and I can eat pie all day, but that is not how it works. So you're going to need to test number of times. So 2 to 4 times. You want to know what math class you're taking as a junior, because both tests cover up through Algebra 2. So if you've finished Algebra 2, by the time your sophomore year is completed, then typically you're going to want to prep over the summer and start testing in the fall. Whereas if you're taking Algebra 2 as a junior, you're going to want to push that back a little bit, probably start after the holidays. You also want to think about your busy times of the year. Do you have a marching band kid? I had 2 marching band kids. Fall was they had a part-time job. That was a tough time to do test prep. You also want to think about when are your school day tests. Most of our school day tests here in the Woodlands are in April. And then are you taking 17 AP classes? So May and late April is going to be super busy for you. So here's next year's calendar. What you'll see is if you prep over the summer, you're going to be focusing on this August SAT date. SAT is doing something different this year. It's normally only ever had 7 test dates. I've been doing this 30 years. They've only ever had 7 test dates. This year we have 8. So there's a new test date in September. So that really gives you kind of 2 opportunities to hit it early if you just prep over the summer. And then it's basically first Saturday, November, not November 1st, but it's mostly first Saturday of each of the months. What's good to pay attention to here is that you have 5 excellent opportunities in the fall semester, whereas you have 3 and maybe only 2 if you're taking a number of AP classes in the spring semester. So keeping in mind that you want to do this 2 to 4 times, you want to have a good runway. You want to have a period of time to do this. Um, Plan ahead, think about when are, these various things making sense with your schedule. ACT is sort of the same thing, just slightly different dates. These asterisks over here mean these are test dates for which you can get the test questions that you just took back. If you decide to work on the ACT, that's a crazy valuable resource. That unfortunately doesn't exist on the SAT anymore now that it's digital. So if you don't care whether you take it in September or October for the ACT, go for October because you'll get your test questions back. All right, so the question that I always get, okay, great. Then how do I do all this? Well, first you want to start 2 to 3 months before your first test date. Some people think, well, I'm just going to go take it cold and see how it goes. Well, you can do that at home without putting those scores on the record. So let's go ahead and get prepped for that first test date. And then you want to choose a learning style that you'll actually do. I have owned 2 different treadmills in my life, and as you probably expect, they have turned into a great place to store my kind of clean, but maybe I could wear it again clothes. So that is not a successful exercise program for me. So for me, I have a personal trainer because I basically don't want to do it. So you have to think about, for your student, what is it that they will actually do? Are they the kind of kid who is really into it? This was me, grab a book and knock it out. Great. Are they the kind of kid that wants to be in a class with some friends because that'll be motivating? Great. Could they use extra accountability, or do they have reasons that they would love to work with someone one-on-one? Maybe that's the right thing. All types of test prep work if you do them. So really the key is, what is it that you're going to do? Because it all boils down to practice. All right. I think that we talked a little bit about this. I don't want to take super, super long, but just know that if you're worried about taking the test too many times, essentially all schools allow you to choose which scores you're sending. So that's not a downside. You don't have to show them everything. Many schools do what's called super scoring, where we'll just do SAT because it's simple. If you got a higher score on the verbal on one test date and a higher math score on a different test date, you send both of those, and the school will add those together to create a super score. And so if a school super scores, then taking it multiple times is potentially beneficial. And then ACT science required, I'm going to go with yes. You should just assume yes when you're thinking about the ACT. All right. So just to review, they're very different. They're changing. Take the time to figure out what's the best one for you. Don't just assume it's the SAT because you live in Texas. Start preparing early. Allow yourself plenty of time to practice and understand all the ways that you can improve your application, which looks like that.
Thank you, Susan. And so let's say you take Susan's program, you spend 3-4 months preparing intensively for the SAT, and you bump up your score 200, 300 points. You're now in the 1400s, maybe even you crack the 1500s. And now you're like, okay, now am I going to get into Harvard? Well, what is the reality of this process? 80% of students who get a perfect score are rejected from Harvard. So it's not just about your test score. The test score is, I would say, arguably the hardest part of this process, at least for many students. But once you get there and you got the GPA, which, as we talked about, grade inflation, a lot of kids have the GPA, then you hustled and you got the test score. So how are they really making decisions? So as I mentioned at the beginning, my background is I worked as a student admissions officer at Yale. So I studied at Yale and there worked in the admissions committee. And this is it. Like, guys, this is the black box of college admissions. Okay. So when I was a student admissions officer and I'd review applications, we would evaluate essays, letters of recommendation, and extracurriculars based on these 4 factors: intellectual curiosity. So not just getting good grades, but actually being curious about the world. Critical thinking, not accepting the world as is, but taking a critical approach about identity, community, system structures, history. Not just concerned about your own ambition, but also concerned about others. And extracurricular and academic recognition. So we're going to talk over the next part of the presentation about how to use your summer and also how to craft a competitive profile so that you don't just end up being a one-dimensional student with a good GPA and SAT score, but you're well-rounded and have what college admissions officers call spark. So this is another framework that college admissions officers will use as part of evaluating. And I'm not going to spend too much time here, but as you can see, it's not just about putting together a laundry list of extracurriculars. It's about thinking intentionally and having kind of long-term commitments and having impact through activities. So if you're just participating, we're going to call that a tier 4 activity. So you play tennis, you're in the debate club, you play, you're doing something. It's better to do something than nothing, but that's going to be our basic level of participation. When you have more responsibility, that's a tier 3. When you're the student government president, you're the editor-in-chief of the school newspaper, that's a tier 2. Well, then what's a tier 1? It's not just that you have a primary leadership role, it's that you show that you're good at it, right? You can be the editor-in-chief of your school newspaper, but how do you show that you're a nationally ranked journalist? Well, that's tough in academics. In sports, it makes sense. You want to play tennis at Stanford? Well, you got to be a ranked tennis player. You want to study economics at Stanford? How do we think about the equivalent in academic and extracurricular terms about being a ranked tennis player? Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through a few examples. And again, this is something in terms of like your activities that it's not just we're suggesting. The colleges are asking you straight up what you're doing over the summer. So literally Stanford's admissions essays is what have you done over the summers? Now look at Columbia's essay. What have you read? So what books, journals, websites, podcasts, essays, plays, presentations, museums? What are you doing? And the key phrase here is outside of academic courses. So when you're in the school year and you're, doing your test prep and taking all of your classes and doing your activities, probably don't have time to be reading some really challenging books independently. You should, but it's tough to. So summer is often our opportunity as well, not just to advance on our extracurriculars, but to develop this deeper intellectual life, which, as Susan will talk about, also contributes to your vocabulary and reading comprehension skills on the SAT. And then here's a final example from University of Michigan. When you apply to the Ross School of Business, they ask you to choose a current event or issue in your community and discuss the business implications. And it's a long essay. It's like 1,000 words. So again, when you are starting a business over the summer or you're getting involved in community service, you have that opportunity to be more engaged in your community over the summer. This gives you more material for your college applications. So these are just several examples, whether it's the literal straight up, what are you doing over the summer, or your intellectual life, or your commitments in the community. These are all different ways that the universities are asking you also to take advantage of your summer. So I'm going to talk about a few things that we often hear from students and families based on one, that extracurricular framework that I presented, and two, some of these admissions essays that we just discussed. So internships. Internships at face value are tier 4 activities. And I get it. Everybody wants to do an internship. The parents love their kids doing internships because they get a taste of the real world. You get an opportunity to work in a business. But if we go to a company and we do a quote unquote job shadow, it's actually not that great. That is my least favorite word on a college application, the shadow. Why? Literally means you're in the shadows. It's very passive. It's honestly not even tier 4 because there's not participation. So how do we use internships rather as a platform to launch your intellectual curiosity? I had a student last summer here in Miami. He did his internship at a marketing agency. And sure, he's following around the director in meetings, but we worked together on an article talking about how AI is transforming marketing. And then we got that article published at a local business journal. So we went from a tier 4 or even worse, because it's just like a passive internship, to turning that into an activity where we got something published, which ends up being a tier 1. So it's not just that you have to do this linear track from tier 4, 3, 2, 1, but by being strategic and thoughtful, intentional in our summer activities, we kind of took a shortcut and went from tier 4 to tier 1. I also liked, these are just kind of some hot takes around college admissions. I always like to talk about pre-college programs. On the one hand, they're great opportunities to help students understand what to study. I really like pre-college programs for the summer when you're in 8th or 9th grade to get that experience living on your own and living on a campus. But these are also tier 4 activities. Why? They're kind of pay to play. And at the end of the day, you're just paying for a course to go and be a student. So being a student and participating in a pre-college program is tier 4. There's no leadership, there's no impact, there's no responsibility. And so while I do like the pre-college programs, don't think for a second that because you paid $15,000 to spend 3 weeks at Harvard over the summer, that that's going to help you get into Harvard. Okay, so love doing it in 8th and 9th grade so you can kind of get that experience. I love the structure it provides to summer, but this is not the shortcut to get into a top school. So what should we be doing over the summer in terms of our extracurriculars? I love the Wharton High School Investment Competition. Right now in the month of June, the John Locke Institute, they do essay competitions and you write essays thinking about political science, philosophy, and history. In the fall, there's the Harvard Economics Essay Contest. So again, in the school year, it's really hard to participate in an essay contest because you always got schoolwork and other activities. Take advantage of the summer, spend the weekend. You know, the Harvard Economics Essay Contest prompt last year, I thought it was really interesting. It was about, what do you think the impact of AI will be on economic inequality? So we're often thinking about AI on the job market, AI and productivity, but AI on economic inequality, that's a new angle. Think about that for a few days, do some research, write an essay. Maybe you win, maybe you don't win. At the end of the day, we're competing in that kind of tier 1 capacity. And that's a way of showing intellectual curiosity, coming back on what they're looking for in an admissions committee. Do you guys know that last year, 40% of students who were accepted into UPenn published academic research? Or Columbia in their application straight up ask you, what research have you done in high school and have you published it? At Caltech, that number is 70%. So if you are looking at STEM or engineering, nursing, pre-med, you have to be doing research. If you're looking at social sciences, humanities, it's a very nice to have, especially if we're looking at very competitive schools. So there are programs that you can pay to work with a research professor, but you can also write a professor at Rice. I had a student who went to Memorial High School. He wrote a Rice professor and just did it on his own and went to Rice a couple of days a week. And they did a really great research project. You can do this with a professor from U of H. So getting that research experience is great, and it's a way of showing that critical thinking. If you get published, that's tier 1. And I love talking about passion projects. This is really where you can shine. This is where you get that initiative, you get that leadership, you get that impact. I think, how are we different from other college counseling companies? Yes, we help you with the list. Yes, we help you with the essays. Yes, we help you with the strategies. But we love working with students from when they're in 8th, 9th, 10th grade to really help them develop these personal passion projects that stand out as part of an application. Now, all of these projects require time. When do you have time? Over the summer. So really great to take advantage of the summer to make these projects happen. And passion projects could be related to your academic interests or entrepreneurship. Another great idea is to start a company. Here's a pitch competition called the Blue Ocean Competition. So it's a great opportunity as well to start that business. You all had an idea of a business you want to start, take advantage of the summer for that as well. This is a platform. I'll kind of give you guys some of our secret sauce here. Here's a freebie. We love to use this platform called the Forage, where you get to do virtual job shadows or the virtual internships. But Marcus, you just said shadows is your least favorite word. Yes, I know. But you get to do a job shadow at a blue chip company. company like Citibank, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. And as you can see here at the bottom, very small print, they're only 5 or 6 hours long. So if one of my students says, hey, Marcus, oh, on Saturday afternoon, I didn't have anything to do. So I just sat down and did a 5-hour investment banking internship at Citibank. Like, heck yeah, that's amazing. You're going to learn something, and then you can use that to expand upon your business, your passion project. So I think this platform called the Forage that we use is a great way of students building that resume and exploring their career interests. I had a student, this is a photo of their book. She loves to bake, and she just published a children's book that has recipes. And summer's a great opportunity. I started tonight's presentation talking about career exploration. Summer's a great opportunity to really dive into that. And one of the platforms that we like to use is Coursera, which you get to take college courses from Ivy League schools or top schools and really dive in to what your academic interest might be. So I have a student who's really interested in entrepreneurship and innovation, and we found this awesome class on design and management from University of Maryland. So over the summer, she's going to be taking this free online course and learning to confirm that this is her major and career path. So we love to recommend students to take advantage of platforms like Coursera.
All right. So another thing that you can do over the summer that is a little more difficult, as Marcus was saying, to do in the regular school year is improve your verbal skills. As someone who we work with, hundreds and by now thousands of students over time, we can get your math skills improved in a much shorter period of time than we can your verbal skills. They take longer to improve. So summer is a great time to spend some time on that because it really boils down to spending time. Here's a couple of things to think about. The first one is vocabulary. The SAT now includes straight up vocabulary questions besides just having more complex vocabulary across the whole test. So if your vocabulary is lacking, that is going to be a rough patch for you in the test. The other is just general reading fluency. Again, obviously on the verbal side of the test, reading comprehension, that is going to matter. But something that students often don't consider is how important your reading fluency is on the math side of the test. On the SAT, much of the difficulty when it comes to a math problem isn't the math. Actually, the math on the SAT is actually pretty easy, but the questions can be complex. And it's the being able to decipher the question and use your basic reading comprehension skills that will help with that. So here are a couple of things you can think about to work on those two things over the summer. One is for vocabulary, you can think about roots, prefixes, and suffixes. One of the hard parts of trying to improve your vocabulary in the old days, there was flashcards and you try to learn these 100 words because we knew those are the words that are going to be on the SAT. First of all, we just don't know because the new format hasn't been around long enough, but also they kind of know that trick. So they don't use the same words over and over, but we can focus in on certain roots or prefixes or suffixes and learn some patterns that then give us access to a much broader set of vocabulary. So you can work on this in lots of ways. There's a QR code. We're having a vocabulary workshop where we're going to do a lot of interactive team building kind of things that will be more fun, but also more memorable and help you to really keep that information in your brain. There's some other great resources. There's a bunch of good vocabulary books. There are actually flashcards still. If you're interested in pursuing that, shoot me an email and I'll hook you up with what are the good ones out there. There's also a great resource called Grammar Chops, and they have specific vocabulary questions that you can practice. Now, neither of these things are going to be building blocks. They're going to be more like just straight up learning words. But anything you do toward learning more vocabulary words is going to be helpful. And honestly, not just helpful on the SAT, honestly, just helpful in your life, in your college applications, in your college writing. just across the board. Oh yeah, Quizlets. Reading fluency. This one is really, summer is a great time to do this, and I'm really talking to, I'm more talking to students or parents of students who are a bit younger, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, because improving your reading fluency takes time. So the bottom line is you need to read more words. I know that sounds like, oh my God, how will I do that? Well, let me show you. It actually isn't that hard. If you just read 20 minutes a day, most people read around 300 words a minute. That's 6,000 words per day. And if you just did that one for a year, that's basically 2.2 million words. That would turn into 730 like solid, New York Times, Economist, like really meaty kind of articles, or 30 books in a year. Now, I don't know very many people who actually read 30 books in a year, but you could be one of those people if you only spend 20 minutes a day. So I just want you to know this is an actually accessible thing to do. Let's say you only read 10 minutes and you only read 15 books a year. I bet that's still a giant improvement over what you're currently reading. Where do you find good things to read? Now, this is the question I get from parents all the time, and I've got a QR code here. Here's a list of excellent resources that are all available online, because the thing we're all carrying around all the time is a smartphone. So you don't even have to get a book. You don't have to go to the library. You don't even have to buy anything. You can just go on your phone to any of these websites. They have excellent resources. Anything that you're interested in, somebody is writing good quality writing about it. If you're into computers, cool. If you're into sports, cool. If you're into movies, cool. If you're into politics, cool. It really doesn't matter what you're into. Somebody is writing something interesting about it. Reading can actually be, I know, dare I say it, fun and interesting. So take a minute. You can download this thing. I've got more information on the download thing that tells you about these things. Some of them might require some subscriptions, but it's a pretty cheap resource to improve your reading fluency. So those are some ideas of ways to spend that extra time. You're sitting around, you get 10 extra minutes, you got your phone in your hand, you could read something.
So while we've been talking about how to craft a really competitive profile, we do want to kind of note that if you are a rising senior, it's time to roll up your sleeves and get to work, especially. And here our time is a little bit more limited. And so we put together this roadmap in particular for the rising seniors, where if you already have your SAT, ACT score, you need to be taking advantage of the summer to be working on that essay. The Common App essay, the personal essay, most important essay you'll do in your life. You got to be thinking about your growth, overcoming a challenge. I had a student the other day tell me, I didn't know I had to be a poet to get into college. Well, yes, you do. You gotta think creatively and critically about a life experience. If you don't have your SAT, you got to be doing SAT and the college essay prep at the same time, so that by July, you get your draft and really finalize your main essay. You work on your resume. August, we're now opening the common application and we're working on supplementals. So it's particular. I know I've spoke mostly this webinar about extracurriculars. Very important that rising seniors take advantage of the summer to work on their essays for college. So we just have here a sample profile. This is a kid that worked with us a couple of years ago, went to the British International School in Houston, and just want to kind of share about how he took advantage of the summer. So as you can see here, had a great GPA and great test score. But these are some of his summer activities that he did each of his summers. So he traveled to some global debate tournaments. Then he took our coaching program and we focused him a little bit less on international relations, a little bit more on finance. So he took a cryptocurrency summer program, used that experience to start a finance club in school. And then the following summer did a podcast, a passion project on the stock market. And with that profile, both the great GPA and SAT and taking advantage of the summer, we applied to a bunch of schools. And as you can see, rejected. He got a lot of no's. But at the end of the day, if you have a competitive profile, we're always looking for just a couple of great acceptances, and you got into Yale, got into Georgetown, BU, and some other schools. So even with a student who on paper has a perfect profile, great SAT, and great summers, it's always a very competitive process. And so, obviously we're thrilled that it worked out for the student. But this is just an example of how to think about how the summers build on each other. If you do that summer program, use that as a launch pad to start a club and have that initiative, and then show that intellectual curiosity in the podcast. So how do we do that? 9th and 10th grade, this is when we love to start working with students, and we're helping them put together that roadmap for college. What classes to take each year. Something that Susan and I can both speak about from different angles is the importance of having the right math sequencing. You don't want to be a year behind in math and do algebra 2 in junior year. So if you are a year behind in math, take advantage of the summer to catch up, right? We want to think about that 4-year roadmap for your extracurriculars, that personal project, and that internship, so that as we move into 11th grade, we can really be focusing on those tier 2s and tier 1s in terms of extracurricular activities. And this is where we'll start to do some of those academic competitions, focus on achievement and leadership. And obviously, this is where we really need to be focusing on the SAT. So Susan here's has an amazing test prep program. They do both their one-on-one and their small group. And so 11th grade is really, some students will be ready to do test prep the summer between 10th and 11th. Some students should be doing test prep the fall of 11th grade. Some students should be doing test prep in January of 11th grade. So I'll leave you all, a chance to talk to Susan and kind of get her expertise to figure out the right timeline of when to do test prep. As you move into senior year, again, this is where we're finalizing that college list. We're making some strategic decisions around early decision, and then we're working on those application essays. So as you can see, if you do all this and you really invest time and effort, our acceptance rates over the years are 2, 3, 5, 8x the official acceptance rate. So obviously doing all this doesn't guarantee you get into Harvard, but our students have 3 times the chance of getting in. Or at UT Austin, if you are not in the top 5% of your graduating class, the acceptance rate is 8%. Our students get almost 3%, 3x times that in terms of admissions probabilities. At a school like Northeastern, our schools crush it. Okay, so if you do all this, you have a much better chance. You're maximizing your probability of getting in and getting a scholarship. So thank you all so much for coming. Susan, I believe this is your QR code. Do you want to kind of explain how they can get more information about Woodlands Test Prep?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this actually might be a QR code for Blue Ivy. And I'm at woodlandstestprep.com, and you can, there are a couple of QR codes earlier. You can always go to our website. There's a contact form. We can hook you up with information on, how to think about your test prep plan. We spend time with parents and families all the time, just to spend 30 minutes and think about what are your specific strengths and weaknesses, what's your schedule like, what's your extracurricular profile look like, so that we can help you map out what's the best testing plan.
Awesome. Well, so feel free to scan here the QR code, get some information. So again, Blue Ivy Coaching, we're experts on the college counseling side. Susan, Woodlands Test Prep, experts on the SAT side, and join forces for this webinar. And super happy to support you in a holistic way through your college admissions process. So please feel free to ask any questions in the chat or reach out to us, and we'd love to support you through the journey. We've also left here the link for Woodlands Test Prep in the chat, so you guys can access both our information as well as Susan's. Well, thank you all so much. Hopefully you all learned something. And thank you as well, Susan. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to turn on your microphone or drop a question in the chat. Otherwise, we appreciate you joining us, and everyone can have a great evening.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great night.
Thank you.